Hey everyone, Tactics here with my 8th and final Mythic Plus guide of Season 3, where I'll be covering the heavily revamped Throne of the Tides dungeon from all the way back in Cataclysm. Just like with the other guides in this series, I'll be diving into both trash and boss fights, discussing abilities, how I recommend you handle them, plus I'll be showing you a simple pug-friendly route at the end of the video, which will be great for early on in the season. I also have a couple written resources available absolutely free. The first is my ability tracking spreadsheet, which shows every single trash mob in Season 3 and just sorts their abilities into various categories. Pretty useful if I do say so myself, so check that out. And on top of that, I've also partnered with Method this season to bring you guys written guides for all 8 dungeons. Really excited for that opportunity, and as always, I'll put those links down in the description below. Now, let us jump right into it. Starting with the trash you're going to face on the way to the first boss, you got Naz'jar Invaders. These guys just have a tank hit in Thrash. It's instant cast, so just be aware if you're pulling multiple of these mobs at one time. And on top of that, they'll occasionally enrage with Slithering Assault, gaining attack speed and move speed for 8 seconds. So if you have a Soothe, get rid of this. Otherwise, you just kind of have to deal with their extra attack speed. The pretty dangerous mobs in this area are actually the Vicious Snapdragons. They're little dogs here, but they basically have a passive that causes their auto attacks to sometimes apply the Razor Jaws bleed effect. This will stack up. It is now a bleed for anyone curious, so you can use things like Dwarf or Evoker Bleed Cleanse, that kind of thing, to clear it. But where this potentially gets dangerous is their Ravenous Pursuit ability, which causes them to fixate onto a random target. So if that fixates onto like a squishy cloth player, for example, and they get some attacks on them and start stacking up this bleed, that can be very, very bad. And unfortunately, this pursuit actually is not stopped by CC. So while the CC does stop the mob itself for a decent duration, it's an 8-second fixate, so you kind of need to just keep these mobs away from the fixate targets, lock them down with CCs, knockbacks, slows, things like Ursals are really good here as well. You just need to keep them away from the fixate target. The main caster mob you're going to face initially are the Naz'jar Oracles. These guys just have a spam cast, random target hit in Water Bolt. Low priority kick here, just anything extra goes into these because they have 2 other higher priority kicks actually. So the first is Healing Wave, interruptible and stoppable, just a random target heal, so try and get that. The more important one is Hex. Random target curse effect for 6 seconds turns them into an animal. This can also target tanks currently, so very, very important that you either interrupt or stop this cast. If it's on anyone else and it does go off, it's usually not the end of the world, and if you have a curse to spell, you can always get rid of it. Naz'jar Sentinels are lieutenant mobs in this area. They are CC immune because of that, and they just have a tank hit in Shellbreaker. Tanks, just be aware, the actual hit itself I didn't find to be too terribly scary. However, on higher key levels it could be, and the real important thing to note is that damage taken increase attached to the end of that debuff as well. So just usually if you have one available, personal list for that damage taken increase specifically. Now they also have a real dangerous random target ability in Crushing Depths. This basically just applies a pretty significant healing absorb onto a random player, and then while that healing absorb is active, they also have a pretty nasty dot. So if you get this on you, pop a personal, and healers, make sure you funnel healing into this target to get that healing absorb off of them as soon as possible. Another lieutenant mob in this area are the Naz'jar Ravagers. These guys have a tank targeted frontal and acid barrage, so make sure tanks you're facing this boss away, and just be aware of the short dot this cone actually applies as well. On top of that, they will just shoot Volatile Bolt at a random player. It's just an 8-yard AoE puddle that's going to remain on the ground, so just make sure you guys get out of this when it's casts. Once you get up the bubble teleporter, there's going to be another caster mob in Naz'jar Tempest Witches. These guys have another random target cast in Lightning Bolt, so again, spare kicks if you're not using them on anything else here, good to use on this. And they also have a magic debuff in Lightning Surge. This applies to a random target. It's just a magic dot that will also splash to anyone within 5 yards. So make sure you're loosely spread when you're pulling these so it doesn't clip any of your party members. And healers get a magic dispel on this ASAP. Deep Murloc Drudges are also going to be in the upstairs area. These guys just have a single ability in Leaping Thrash. It's going to jump to a random target, do a little 4-yard AoE. So again, just like you're loosely spreading when you pull Tempest Witches, same kind of rule applies here. So you're already doing that, so not really a big deal. And they were basically going to have back-to-back boss fights. So the first is Lady Naz'jar. Again, hopefully I'm saying that right. I've said it like 6 times now, and maybe it's wrong every single time. I guess, who knows? We'll see. The main thing on this boss, throughout the fight, there's going to be be geysers that spawn, just swirlies on the ground all over the room. These seem to be both player baited and random. It's like a combination, but just make sure you're avoiding them whenever they spawn, and make sure you keep interrupts on the boss herself. She's just going to occasionally target a random player with Water Bolt, so just kick that. Shock Blast is going to be debuffing a random player, just a little AoE around the player, and then when it expires, it shoots out shock orbs. So when you get this, move a little bit away from your party, just so they can actually avoid the shock orbs that you are shooting out on detonation. Outside of that, Focus Tempest is just some random target damage. It's basically just going to pulse onto 2 players every tick, and you just need to kind of heal through that damage. Now, outside of the boss phase, at 60% and at 30%, the boss runs to the center of the room, goes immune, and spawns a wave of adds. There's going to be 1 Honor Guard, 2 Frost Witches, and then a bunch of Deep Sea Murlocs. And then when you defeat these adds, she basically becomes attackable again. These are pretty similar in terms of abilities to what we've seen before. So the Honor Guard, they have that Slithering Assault and Rage effect, so you can shoot that. Not really a big deal because there's only one of these guys, but notable. They will also occasionally jump to a random player and channel the Trident Flurry Frontal through their position, so you can step out of this. And these mobs are actually also CCable, so you can use a CC to stop the cast as well. The Frost Witches, these guys will just spam Frostbolt at the tank. It has a magic slow as well, so you can dispel that or just keep interrupts on them. They will also occasionally buff themselves with Icy Veins, and this is a magic buff, so it can be purged, but also, again, Frost Mage is probably looking at this very, very juicy because they can spell steal that. I recommend just kind of interrupting these Frost Witches when they spawn, because they always kind of spawn in set locations with the Honor Guard in the middle, the Frost Witches on either side. So kick those Frost Mages early as soon as you can, just to group them up and just keep them, you know, CC'd, interrupted, whatever. Again, because it's tank targeted, it's not the end of the world, but the real thing is trying to group them up as quickly as possible. Deep Sea Murlocs here, exactly the same as the other Murloc Drudges we talked about. Leaping Thrash targets a random player, deals a little bit of 4-yard splash damage, so make sure you got a bit of a loose spread on in this phase. Once you've defeated Lady Naz'jar, you'll walk right into Commander Ulthok. For tanks here, Crushing Claws is the tank buster. You want to make sure you use a defensive for this and the following damage amp, kind of like that Shellbreaker cast we talked about previously. The main source of damage for the group on this fight is the Festering Shockwave. Notably though, there are a bunch of kind of pillars and outcroppings in this room, and you can LOS this to completely mitigate the damage. You avoid the initial hit, you avoid the dot. Maybe this gets changed, but currently on the PTR you can do this, and that's a massive damage, overall damage taken decrease on this fight if you do so. The main mechanic to actually deal with on this phase is the Bubbling Fissures, so when this is cast, it spawns puddles underneath 3 random players, and these are going to remain in play for the rest of the boss fight. When the boss casts Awaken Ooze, all of these fissures become an ooze mob for 12 seconds, and they just begin to fixate on a random player. If they ever get towards them, you're going to take the same debuff as you would if you stepped in the puzzle, which is Bubbling Ooze, so not ideal, big haste reduction here, but the main thing is that these will be knocked back if they are ever hit by an ability, even though in other ways they are immune to other forms of CC. So the key here is you just make sure you are constantly hitting them with something to keep them away from you at all times for the 12-second duration of that fixate. How I recommend you handle this is just making sure your party is positioned such that these ooze mobs are forced to kind of patrol through the boss itself in order to actually get to you, and that allows both your tank and any potential melee players you have to actually just, you know, use cleaving abilities when they're close to keep them knocked back and away from the group. Very similar to dealing with the actual balls on the last boss of Underrot, if you guys are familiar with that. Similar to that boss as well, you're going to kind of be kiting around this room in a circle as you kind of fill up with those puddles, get a bunch of these ads spawning, etc., etc. And again, use those pillars, use those outcroppings to your advantage to have everyone who's not your tank LOS that Festering Shockwave if you can. Then you'll be able to make your way through a gauntlet back down the little bubble elevator and towards the Mindbender Ghur'sha boss room. You are now forced to kill this boss on the right side. It's no longer optional. You do have to go this way, so keep that in mind. On your way, you'll find Faceless Watcher mobs. These are lieutenants again, so immune to CC. They'll do a little combo here. So first they're going to grip in all players with clenching tentacles, and then they'll immediately start channeling Shadow Smash. So when this happens, make sure you get out of that smash before it actually goes off. Outside of that, they just target the tank with Crush, so you just want to be aware if you're pulling multiple of these mobs at one time. These guys are often joined by Faceless Seers. These are the casters. In this area, they're going to channel Mind Flay into a random target, use a CC, or interrupt that cast to prevent the damage. And then on top of that, they will shoot a Null Blast line. It's just going to actually appear. It's not actually coming from the mob. It just kind of appears at a random player. So just make sure you avoid this line. Otherwise, you will take some damage and get silenced. Minions of Ghur'sha are the final mob in this area, and they basically just have one ability in Psionic Pulse. This deals just a small tick of AoE damage, but the real danger here comes with the quantity of these mobs. There's like, very often you'll have like 5+ of these in a pull, so when you can, use a CC to stop some of these casts, just so you don't get hit by like a billion of these AoEs all at once. Then you'll make your way to the boss fight itself. This is a 2-phase boss fight, the first going from 100 to 25%, and the second phase being from 25% to dead. In this first phase, you're going to be dealing with Flame Shock debuffs going out on random players. This is a magic dispel here, and healers, you will want to be dispelling on CD here, basically, because you will get overrun by these debuffs here, so be careful of that. If a player gets a debuff and you know you don't have a magic dispel available, Personals here, very, very good if you're going to eat a full duration of a Flame Shock, and that can kind of help your healer reset by basically ignoring that one dispel, and then they can start dispelling on the next one, etc., etc. here. Obviously as well, a Warlock with a magic dispel, probably pretty powerful, something to keep in mind. Outside of that debuff, Earth Fury is just going to spawn a wave of swirlies. I believe it's 4 swirlies over 2 seconds underneath every single player. So there's a couple ways to deal with this. One, just be spread. Probably the strat for pugs because, you know, coordination is a little lacking. In coordinated groups, what I expect you'll see is probably people stack up and rotate around together just to concentrate these swirlies in one area, making them very, very easy to dodge. And then you don't have to worry about getting cut off by anyone. The big thing for tanks to deal with is the Storm Flurry totem. So this is a totem that's not really a totem, you know, it's cleavable, it has a lot of HP, and basically while this is alive, the tank's damage intake skyrockets. So tanks, make sure drag the boss immediately over to these totems when they spawn and use a defensive. DPS, make sure you focus this totem just so that your tank doesn't immediately fall over from the extra tank damage coming out when this is up. Now, when the boss reaches 25% HP, all those abilities kind of go away, and you fight Mindbender Ghur'sha herself. It jumps off the head of this guy, and you deal with her on her own. Healers, beware when this does happen, because sometimes healers were getting aggro on this mob from the healing in P1, so be aware of that. Stand away from melee. But basically here, 2 things to worry about. The first is a cast Terrifying Vision. You need to LOS this around one of the pillars in the room, so just always tank the boss near a pillar if you can. Outside of that, you're just going to be taking constant damage in this phase from Mind Rot, and that just kind of needs to be healed through. From here, you'll be able to move towards the final boss room, and this is where all the Gill Goblins are. So you've got Gill Goblin Hunters in this area. They've got Throw Spear, which targets a random player with a physical hit, so use a CC if you have it to stop that. And then occasionally as well, the mobs will basically just disengage, so they move straight backwards, and then they'll use Poison Spear specifically on the tank. So 1, tanks, try and point them so their backs are like at a wall so they don't just split up. And 2, you know, use a defensive if a lot of these Poison Spears are lining up. Healers or anyone else in the group that has one, poison dispels at the ready for when this actually hits the tank, if any do. And of course, CCs do work on this Poison Spear cast as well. But again, the Throw Spear one I think takes priority because tanks can kind of live through this, especially if you have a Poison Dispel immediately after. Whereas random players, they might get hurt by that Throw Spear ability. So definitely prio the Throw Spear stops, but if you have more, stop the Poison Spears. Casters in this area are the Gill Goblin Aquamages, and they have a single random target cast in Aqua Blast. Pick as many of these as you possibly can just to reduce the random damage. A lieutenant mob in this area is the Tainted Sentry, and they also only have one single ability in Swell, so channel of shadow damage is quite dangerous on its own, so make sure you're using defensives, healing Cs to survive, but it can actually be more dangerous if you deal with the unstable corruptions in this area at the same time. So basically these guys are constantly spawning throughout the zone. It is a bit of a gauntlet as you make your way to the last boss, and the issue is with their Wave of Corruption debuff, which applies to the entire party on death, increasing your shadow damage taken quite dangerous here as well when in combination with that swell shadow damage channel here. So be aware of these. It is a disease effect, so you can dispel some of them, but the main issue is if you ever kill these immediately before a swell cast. So just keep in mind of what these stacks are at as you're pulling the Tainted Sentry mobs. If you need to wait for a little bit, wait. If you need to stop cleaving, AoEing that things for a few seconds, just wait, just so you don't actually get the stacking up way too high, and then like one tick of swell just like completely wipes your group. That brings you to the final boss of the dungeon, Ozumat, which has seen basically a complete and total change. It's no longer just like you're fighting waves of ads and stuff like that. So initially, you're going to see an ink mob, mini boss, whatever, in the middle of the room here. Tanks, you want to make sure that you are always staying in melee range of this boss, or they're going to spam cast Foul Bolt at you. You can abuse that with Spell Reflect, notably very similar to the Tempest boss back in Nokud, if you remember Season 1. You'll also want to make sure that you are a bit away from the rest of your party, because the tank buster here is Merc Spew, which is also a frontal, so you don't want to hit them with that. Also make sure using a defensive on this cone if you have one. Healers, be prepared to keep players up when the Putrid Roar cast goes out. It's got an initial hit and a dot. Can be scary if it overlaps with anything. Players, make sure you are using a defensive for this cast if you aren't full health going into it. In terms of other abilities to deal with in this phase, Blotting Barrage is going to target 3 players at a time. It deals damage to them, and it leaves behind a pool of blotting darkness around the little area it designates there. These pools are going to just constantly grow throughout this fight, unless one of the 2 players buffed with the Cleansing Flux ability stands like directly on top of them to kind of soak them up with the water. If you can, I recommend having the debuffed players with that Blotting Darkness initial debuff get as close together as possible to drop those puddles very, very near each other initially, and that makes cleaning them with the Cleansing Flux just a lot easier. Occasionally, you're also going to get some ad spawns throughout this boss fight. Deluge of Filth swirlies are just going to kind of spawn everywhere throughout the room, and this is going to create 2 splotch ads and 3 sludge ads. So the sludge ads, these guys just need to be tanked. They will apply a stacking grimy dot to the tank, so be aware of how many of these you have. And then on death, these will also explode, so watch the swirly on death, but they'll also, when they do die, will leave behind one of those same puddles that needs to be cleared and will constantly grow. So tanks, you want to try and tank all of these mobs here right next to where you just dropped puddles if you can, just to conserve space. Splotch ads are just kind of caster mobs. Just going to spam Ink Blast at random targets. You want to make sure you kick these in quickly, and again, tank taunt them, get interrupts, range interrupts on them, bring them all together right next to the old ink puddles that are on the ground there, and just cleave them all down ASAP. Use CCs and other interrupts to prevent further casts. In terms of positioning here, I recommend the 4 non-tank players stay relatively close together and just kind of rotating around the room as they drop those puddles, again, as close together as you possibly can. The tank should be positioned ahead of them, so in the same direction they're rotating with, just so that they can point that frontal away, but they're still on the same side of the puddles as the rest of the group, so when the ads actually spawn, they can easily group them up right next to the old puddles, and, you know, melee are still able to cleave without having to run like through the boss, as an example. Once you actually defeat this Ink of Ozumat boss here in the center, you get empowered by Tidal Surge while taking constant ticking damage from Raining Darkness from Ozumat, who's now up on the corner of the room, and you basically just race here, kill Ozumat before they kill you. That is the ability section done. Now let's go through my simple pug-friendly route here. As a disclaimer, I'm not saying this is going to be like the fastest route. It's not going to be the most optimal route available, but what it will be is consistent and easy to execute, as I've avoided like massive dangerous pulls that require high coordination. I've avoided any weird or difficult skips, all those things, but feel free to adjust as you see fit. And as you can kind of see here, this is pretty much a W key dungeon. We've done like very, very minimal skipping, so it's just kind of like Temple of the Jade Serpent, almost like back in Season 1, where it's like you're basically pulling almost every mob in the dungeon with you know, little variance here, not too much to think about. So going off here, nice big first pull, love to do that. that. You got all cooldowns, you got Bloodlust, even in pug groups can be not too bad and gives you a decent time save here. And then you do some smaller pulls here. Again, potential here, you can just kill these oracles and then pull the sentinel into the next pack, something to think about. None of these mobs here are spawned yet, by the way. They don't spawn until you come back downstairs, so that's why they're pulled later. Otherwise, maybe you would actually pull them into these early pulls. But anyways, go up here. This is the gauntlet here. I recommend just running across basically to these oracles and then just tagging these sentinels, because it's much easier to just group up everything on these two casters as opposed to trying to move these casters around, right? So bring these guys all up towards the casters. Moving forward, be careful of this patrol here. If you basically pull it in any area that's like right here, outside of the dead center, so like this area and this area, it can easily social aggro these mobs. So one, if you have like Mind Sue's Sap in Prison to use on these mobs to make it easier, do that. Or two, just wait for it to be like either here in the pat or here in the pat and just pull it along the wall into this pull. So something to keep in mind. Also, again, watch that frontal as you are pulling it in tanks. Then you do pull 6 here, and the main reason I don't pull this into pull 6 is because this is a much more dangerous tank pull here with like the double snapdragons. These guys absolutely truck currently. I wouldn't be surprised to see these guys nerfed before the season goes live, so keep that in mind. Speaking of, there's a massive pack of them here. This pull is exceptionally dangerous. Use your AoE stops, use all of your tank cooldowns, and be prepared to kite, honestly, depending on how scary they are. Doesn't matter if you pull them on this side of the room or this side of the room. It's the exact same no matter what. So keep that in mind. You can pull whatever they are. Got a pack here before the boss, and then you have the first boss, and then the second boss does spawn in this room. So again, something to keep in mind, you may want to just kill this pack anyways, both packs on the sides, just so that you don't accidentally butt pull them while you're doing the Commander Ulthok fight. Now, potentially, you shouldn't need that much space, right? Like if you pull the boss, and for example, say we didn't pull this pack, you pull the boss, start here, and rotate around the room this way, you likely won't run out of space. But if you just, in a pug group, you never know what's going to happen. Someone's going to tab target, whatever. So just, keep that in mind. Maybe pull these, especially if you're not feeling too tight on the timer. Otherwise, though, you've got a little gauntlet to run through on the way back before making your way down and towards this side here. Feel free to add this Faceless Watcher into this pack here, and you can do things like group these guys into the next pack, that kind of thing. Adjust the pulls as you see fit here. Basically just going through. Feel free to pull these guys onto boss or not. Just kill them before. Either works. Killing the boss here, and then you have to run all the way back down the other way. You get to kill this first pack, and then once you move down the stairs here, this is kind of where the gauntlet starts. So this is where you're going to be constantly flooded with these unstable corruption mobs, so keep that in mind here. But the real scary pack, I think, is over here, because one, you'll have to deal with a bunch of these unstable corruptions after, killing this Tainted Sentry kind of deal. You're going to pull another Tainted Sentry, so watch your stacks of the shadow damage increase. And then this is literally 6 casters right now, so again, I don't know if this is going to stay in the live version of the game when this goes into Season 3, but I feel like it shouldn't. Just 6 caster mobs, just spam casting, that feels extremely mean. So I'm guessing this is going to get changed, but who knows? Maybe this stays as is, and you're just like praying people kick on cooldown and don't overlap kicks. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. And then you got a couple Tainted Sentries. Again, be careful with these unstable corruption debuffs into the final boss. But that is it, guys. My full guide to the revamped Throne of the Tides dungeon in Season 3 of Dragonflight. Hopefully you did learn something, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it, including plus 20 key walkthroughs to help you get Keystone Hero and your dungeon teleports, raid boss guides for normal, heroic, and mythic, and much more. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those down in the comments below, or you can come ask me over on my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I'll be streaming all of my Mythic Plus keys and my raid progression once the season actually starts. Of course, I would not be able to continue making all this content for you guys if it weren't for my fantastic supporters over on Patreon, so thank you guys, I appreciate you. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.